Hello, hello. Hopefully, with any luck, this is going to the Ask an Author Facebook group as it's supposed to. Facebook claims I'm live right now, so hopefully, with any luck, this is going to the right place. It's going to the Ask an Author Facebook page as it's supposed to, and we are able to go ahead and start chatting about books here in a moment. I'm going to take a couple of minutes here just to do my double check, just to make sure that things are where they are supposed to be, because I'll be completely honest, sometimes Facebook decides to play tricks on me. Normally, I go through Zoom. Instead, for this, I'm going through Facebook itself. And so it's always this like weird shock to the system. Debbie, wonderful. Thank you so much for saying hi and for being the first, I think, because it's really, really helpful. I can actually see that this is connecting and going out to people. I've had a couple of technical disaster episodes before. So, things didn't go out as they planned. There were technical difficulties. So it's really good to know that things are actually popping up as expected. We're going to take a couple moments to go ahead and let people gather a little bit. I can also already see that we have quite a few people watching already, which is great. Everybody say hello to each other. You're already telling people where you are. Again, this is our first go with the Ask an Author virtual book club. Wonderful. I can see Scott is already kicking things off and preempted me and dropping in a question. If you guys have questions at any point during this, go ahead and do drop them in the comments. This is a book club, so if you are interested in what somebody else is talking about, if you want to sort of jump off and discuss things amongst yourselves, please feel free to go through and use the comments as a virtual book club, just like you would on Facebook. You can reply to each other. You can go ahead and keep the conversation going. I think it's a really fun way to talk to other readers, and I know there are some people who are going to be watching after this has come out. So my hope is they're still going to get a bit of the experience of going through and adding their opinions and doing, asking questions. I'm going to be going through and adding my comments and questions also. So please do go ahead and add whatever you would like. Oh my God, Kelly, it's negative 20 degrees wind chill in New Brunswick. That is really cold. I think I was telling my family the other day that the coldest wind chill I've ever been in, I think, was 21 degrees. That sounds about right. When I lived in Iowa for university, it was too cold for me. So you're braver than I am. But again, I'm gonna go ahead and do a little housekeeping here. I'm gonna make sure that this is shared to all the pages it's supposed to be shared to, including my author page, because we'd love as many people to join as possible, of course. And then we're gonna go ahead and get going. So I really do appreciate you guys going along with me and trying out this big experiment of an Ask an Author book club. I'll go into a little bit more detail about what a regular session of a monthly book club would look like. Again, this is a big experiment, so I'm open to changing things around if things aren't working for us. But I'm hoping that, for people who love books and love reading, it's really, really nice getting a chance to talk to other readers. So I'm hoping people end up enjoying this. So let me just pop a comment here to my Facebook, to my main author page, so we can get a few more readers, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for already dropping some comments in. Really, really helpful, and we'll be able to kick the conversation off. And we may not even need my top 3 most commonly asked questions I get about this book to kick us off. We'll have to see. Okay, so here we go. This is really exciting watching somebody type live. I apologize. Normally I'm faster if I'm typing on an actual keyboard and everything, but I'm just one-handing on an iPad here. So, all right. I think we're getting to it here. And wonderful. Let me also know if it was helpful for you guys to have a to have the have the event come up in the actual Facebook group where, again, my assistant Mark and I are trying some new things out, doing some different things. So really helpful. So somebody just asked, what did you miss? You have missed absolutely nothing. We've just sort of been gathering and getting things going. So we've got a nice number of people. I'm going to go ahead and launch in and get started. So a little bit of an explanation of what's going on. Last year I did almost 40 something different Ask an Authors. We did one a week with some breaks, of course, in between. And I'll be completely honest, I absolutely loved doing it, but it was a lot, especially with starting out with a brand new. Somebody's saying that video is breaking up. I'm just double checking I'm on the right Wi Fi, and I am, so hopefully that's okay. Um, so last year I did one a week, and I'll be honest, I absolutely loved it, but it was a lot, especially with also going through and making sure that I was doing all of the things that I needed to do for my writing career. So we're trying things a little bit differently this year. I also thought it would be fun to bring a little bit more interactivity, do a little bit more with talking back and forth, because I'm an author, but I'm also a reader, and I know that all of you are readers as well. And I thought it would be a really fun opportunity to kind of do some different things with Ask an Author. So we're going to try at least through March. We have guests booked for February and for March, and how it's normally going to work is I'll come on and you'll see the regular two box that you would normally see, where it's me and a guest. And the guest and I will talk for a few minutes. I'll ask a few questions about the book, kind of get the discussion launched. And then, because we'll have discussed what the book is in advance, because that will be announced in advance, I will also get to open the floor up to you guys, and you'll get to ask a lot of questions, and maybe ask some more questions that you wouldn't normally get to do in an event, especially around somebody's new release, because people haven't had a chance to read the book yet. So I know there's a lot of stuff that I don't talk about with my books because it's just spoilers abound, but this is the chance for that, and this is the opportunity to go through and ask all the things about the back end of a book, or the overarching plots and character things that you really can't talk about without giving away a lot about what's going on with the plot to other readers, because we don't want to spoil things for everybody else. But it is really fun to go through and do that when we're having more of a book club style discussion. So I'm going to talk at the end and tease a little bit about who's going to be coming on in February. But for now, keep asking your questions, keep asking your keep popping stuff in comments. Again, I had some questions pre-prepared just in case, because you never want to go into something completely cold and realize that nobody's asking anything, but I should have known already you guys were going to be all over this. So I'm going to do my very best to scroll back and just start at the top and start answering some questions. So, oh my God, there's so many. I actually need to pull my iPad out. So hold on one second with me. And I can go ahead and get you guys some answers to some things. So let's see. Do. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and take a look here. I am so incredibly flattered and impressed that you guys are with me here. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and take a look. There are so many that I'm just going to start where I start, because I'm not getting absolutely everything. But let's go ahead and launch in here. So Andrea said, love the personalities of all the Debs. Which was your favorite character to write? So very fair, because I kind of asked this question back to you guys in the group. I had a few characters I really enjoyed writing. I really loved writing Lily, because of course she's our central character and she goes on a big arc and a big journey throughout the whole book. But I really have a lot of fun doing little bits and pieces with side characters. And so a character like Catherine is always an absolute blast to write, because Catherine is sort of if you have sort of the good angel and the bad devil on Lily's shoulders, sort of in Catherine and Leanna. Catherine is that really fun character who's, really just there for her friend. She really wants to, advocate for her friend. She loves her family. She has all her reasons for doing things, for doing her own debutante season, and she's just a fun person to write. I really loved writing the imperfects in particular, because I love as any of you guys know who've read my books before, I really love writing about relationships between women. I think it's really fun to explore female friendships and talk about what women's friendships are like and how women interact. I think, unfortunately, there's not always great depictions of women in pop culture and in literature sometimes. I see a lot of sort of jokes about people talking about if you get a whole group of women together, it's always catty. And that really hasn't been my experience. I have fantastic relationships with female friends, and my sister is really important to me. You guys will know that Justine actually interviewed me for the launch of The Last Dance of the Debutante in the United States. So it's really a fun way to kind of incorporate a little bit of that into the book and into my writing. So one of the things that I hope people know me for a little bit is that I always like to write about female friendships. So Catherine was a great way of getting into writing a bit about that. Let's see. You guys are moving fast here. This is great. Thank you so much for all the questions and comments. Marilyn said, I can't get that image of Liana sprawled out on the sofa with a bottle of champagne dangling from her hand. Yeah, Liana, unfortunately, was a little bit of a lost soul, I would say. I think it's probably fair to say. Let's see. I see some people from the wonderful Step Into the Story have joined. Thank you guys so much. They talked about the book yesterday, I believe it was. I'm behind here in the UK, so sometimes time zones throw me off a little bit. But thank you very, very much for that. And you guys can go over and you guys, you wouldn't believe it. I've got an Adobe Flash player trying to start up while we're doing this. Doesn't my computer know that we're supposed to be doing a book club here? Very, very annoying. Susie, thank you so much for thinking the interview with Justine was fun. Kim is saying, I would love to hear about the research that you did for this book. Very happy to talk about research. There were some things that I wish I could have done, so I can talk a little bit about that as well, and maybe add a little bit more detail. I was very lucky, and some of you may have heard me talk about this already. I was very lucky in that there was a book called The Last Curtsy by Fiona McCarthy that had come out years ago, and my mother won it, I think, actually in a raffle at a bookstore, and she read it and thought it would make a great story. So this was all about the last years of the last year of the debutante presentations, 1958, which is of course when our story is set. And so I use that as the jumping off point because the author Fiona McCarthy gives such incredible detail about what the girls wore, what the presentation itself was like, what the season was like, all of the little nuances of things like if you had a cocktail party and not a ball, or if you had both a cocktail party and a ball, those kind of meant different things. And that was a different level of financial commitment, and certain girls wouldn't have been able to afford that. But she also, I think, made a really, really interesting point, which was it was not necessarily wealth that determined the success of a girl's season and the popularity of a girl. And I kind of like the idea of playing around with these ideas of different stratification between the debutantes themselves. Kind of understanding that within every subculture there are distinctions of class and cliques and all of those different things. So that was a great starting point. And then I went ahead and did a lot of reading society magazines. I have a couple of them back here. So this is the Tatler, and that's also the Tatler, my apologies. This is the Sketch. So the Sketch actually gets name checked in the book, and the Tatler does briefly as well, but I chose to focus on one of the society magazines to talk a little bit more about what the girls would have been reading about during the season and how the season was actually reported on. So that was a really fun thing to draw on also, but probably the biggest and most helpful thing was actually talking to some of the women who went through the season. So I was able to talk to one woman who was presented in 1958. She didn't do the season, she just did the presentation. So she did her curtsy to the Queen. And I don't think I've actually told this story. I got a suggestion, I think, again, from my mother, to place an advertisement in The Lady, which is a magazine that's been going on for years and years and years. And in the back, there are still traditional sort of help wanted placements for ladies' maids, butlers, things like that, believe it or not. And so I placed an ad in the back of an issue of The Lady, and one of the women from 1958 reached out to me and said she would be happy to be interviewed. So I was able to actually get her experience and talk to her about what that was like. And then the season, of course, and I wrote about this in my author's note, the season goes on. Although the presentation stopped, the season goes on for a number of years after. And so I spoke to two women who were presented in who had their coming out parties in 1964. And they were able to give me a lot of detail about some of the things about sort of where they shopped and what they did and all of that, but more about sort of how they felt about things, what the experience was like. One of them, it seemed like, had a pretty good time. The other didn't necessarily enjoy her season as much, and there were some personal reasons for that, but also some personality reasons. She was a bit more quiet, a bit more introverted, and I think that probably was very difficult for somebody who um, wasn't as comfortable moving around in the world socially at that point in time in her life, because you have to remember a lot of these girls are 18, 19 years old. They, this is not a young adult book, but it's sort of more of a young adult crowd. And so it was really interesting speaking to them. So that was a really fun opportunity. That was a really fun opportunity to actually to get to speak to some people who experience this thing. Michelle asked in a follow-up question, she says, that's interesting. So some women only did the presentations. That's absolutely right. You could be a debutante and be presented, but your family would then decide whether you would go ahead and have the full season. So that would be everything from you could have the cocktail party, you could have Deb's lunches, you could have a ball, you could have all of these different events going on. And I have to admit, there were some events I didn't even get into. So some of these girls were invited to television show tapings, some of them were invited to, West End premieres and things like that because of their connections. Some of them did charity work. There's a whole run of events that happened after the events of Catherine's party. You would have had things like the Dublin Horse Show and the Scottish balls, a lot of country balls where you're out of London, you're in different counties in England, and you're maybe doing 2 or 3 balls in a weekend. And so I didn't include a lot of that stuff because of course, the tragedy of what happens to Gideon. And so I decided I needed to sort of rein in the season a little bit for the purposes of the narrative. But there's so much that could go into a season, but your presentation itself, you're officially being presented to the Queen as a debutante, that was a bit of a separate event that kicked off these other events for some of these girls. So yeah, it's a really interesting. It was really interesting speaking to people who obviously had different family priorities, different resources potentially, about what it was that their season looked like. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead. So Scott says, I think you added a grandmother to the story. What was the storyline before the grandmother was added? So I'm notorious. I've added 2 grandmothers to 2 books. So in the second draft. So the Light Over London, the grandmother character did not exist. And in The Last Dance of the Debutante, the grandmother did not exist. So what happened was, I wrote, in the case of The Last Dance of the Debutante, I wrote the book, and Lily was determined to go to university. She was going to sit her exams, she was studying for her exams, and throughout the book, her exams sort of, her studying slipped down her priority list, and it sort of went away. And one of the things about first drafts is you are sort of working out what works and what doesn't work of the story. So for me, I realized that I was pulling away a lot of detail around her studying. Oh, and by the way, her teacher, who she ends up eventually contacting, and she meets in the library again and then ends up contacting to study for her exams, Her teacher was very much a figure in the book who was kind of asking her, why she's doing this and all that. And sometimes you write something and it's just not working. And so I pulled all of that material out and I kind of stripped that down, and I tried my best to make the studying for university section work, and it just wasn't working. And it was kind of one of those notes that I got from my editor in my first edit letter, which is what you get when you receive your first notes on a first draft. And she was like, I just feel like we need to up the stakes here, and I don't know what it is, but something's not working. And I thought, yeah, I know exactly what it is. We need to have Lily a step before deciding she wants to go to university, and there needs to be some sort of external pressure happening. It's not just coming from her mother, uh, who, when I originally wrote the book, her mother was a much more stern character, a much more difficult character. She was still sort of the old Vic, the widow who had never really come out of into society, but I couldn't really justify the way that she was behaving with the way that she had lived her life for a period of time. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a monetary reason why Lily needs to do the season. And then the grandmother presented herself as the reason that somebody might, the reason that she might have that need is because she's fearful that her grandmother, who holds the purse strings, will pull that money. So that's really where that came from. And I feel like it's interesting that sometimes there's a moment where you realize you've done something to your draft and things just start falling into place. It's almost like getting the right piece in a jigsaw into the right spot, and suddenly you've got things that will all work. And so suddenly, the reason that her mother was the way she was, and the reason that Lily kind of was forced into this decision that to leave school and things like that, it's things started to make sense again in a way that they were not making sense before. So I was very happy that that one little, maybe we need to raise the stakes here, maybe we need to see what's going on behind the scenes, really helped. Debbie, I'm really glad that understanding the process is interesting. I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about writing process, and I love talking about the business of being an author also. And this is my chance to do that. So I get very nerdy. Um, Mary Beth says, I loved your descriptions of the girls' dresses. Did you describe, ooh, I just lost it. Did you describe actual dresses you saw photos of, or did you create the dresses in yourself in your mind? So a lot of what I describe is stuff that I want to wear. So, so a lot of the dresses are, I'm sort of familiar with the styles of the time. I did look at a lot of photographs of what was available, what the girls would have potentially worn. Debutante fashion was not as fashion forward as other fashions. So, you couldn't wear red. And that's something that a couple of the women who I spoke to told me. In fact, one of them said she bought a red dress and her mother was horrified and would not let her wear that until she was no longer a debutante. So there were certain things that are more debutante-like. So lots of pastels. Fiona McCarthy talks about watered silk being one of the big fabrics that was used for a lot of the dresses at the court presentation. Queen Charlotte's ball, everybody had to wear white, and it had to be a long dress. So you had certain things that you would have to adhere to in order to sort of be appropriate for whatever event you were at. But for me, it was just a chance to basically muck around in fashion history, which I love. And this was before I started sewing. What you guys can't see right now is there's just a whole bunch of mess right here because I need to alter a dress that I'm trying to teach myself how to, or trying to learn how to sew. This was my chance to kind of have a little bit of wish fulfillment here. Um, let's see, what else do we have? I saw it flew by too quickly for me to grab it, but I did see a question about whether this might be a book that would be appropriate for teenagers, because somebody's granddaughter might be interested. You guys can let me know what you think, but I hope so. I think a lot of what I was writing about was drawing on sort of my experiences with sort of having people in your life where you have to make a decision about whether your friendship is really a friendship or not, whether you've found your people. And I think Lily finds the imperfects, and those are her people. And I hope that those can be kind of valuable lessons for somebody who's I think this person said 15. So I hope that that would be something that your granddaughter would enjoy. But you guys can weigh in also, and let us know what you think. Um, Denise says, for the sake of finding a good husband, it seemed like the Debs had a lot of freedom, staying up late, away from home, and in some cases very far from home, varied activities with men and women. Did trouble often follow this freedom? That's a really interesting question, and I realize I'm about to talk about sex right after talking about whether this book is appropriate for a 15-year-old. But I think it's part of the story. Um, I watched some documentaries with debutantes, and I'll see if I can find that old documentary. And I also watched, listened to a lot of people talking about this subject and talking about sort of what these girls would have been expected to do during the time. I think it's naive to think that there weren't people who were maybe stretching the boundaries of what was acceptable. But the impression I got that was that a lot of these girls were basically straight out of the schoolroom. They really didn't have a lot of exposure to boys. They were sort of quote unquote, good girls from good homes, and that there was, flirtation, and I think heavy petting was what somebody described it as, but there was a boundary that a lot of them wouldn't cross because there was a lot of fear. Now you have to remember, this is before the sexual revolution. This is before sort of things really start to change and attitudes change towards sex as being a more open thing that's talked about in society. So I think there's still a little bit of that stigma. Somebody in a previous event talked about how it's really interesting listening to somebody talk and reading about debutantes who are not chaperoned. And I think that's a big adjustment, because if you think about it, a lot of these girls, their mothers would have been presented sort of just after the war into the 30s, and their grandmothers would have been presented sort of Edwardian era in some cases, if there's a big generational gap, perhaps at the very end of the Victorian era. So there are a lot of different shifting attitudes towards women's places in society, sex, class, all sorts of things going on at this time. And so I think it was a little bit, it depended a little bit on your own family, but I think that the prevailing attitude was that you probably wouldn't have they probably wouldn't have bent the rules completely or broken the rules completely, but may have bent the rules. And I think also it's interesting looking at what these girls might have been willing to do, such as, go out late at night, go in taxis by themselves, that their mothers wouldn't have been able to necessarily do because they would have had to be chaperoned. So I think it's just a fascinating time, because again, we're sort of on this linchpin in society where a lot is about to change, but they don't necessarily know what's coming up. So that's why I decided to write about 1958. It wasn't just that the presentations were ending, it was also the fact that society is about to go through a huge amount of change, and I'm well documented as saying I love writing about those moments of change, because I think it's really an interesting way to put your characters through their paces and really challenge them and have them do some interesting things and make some interesting decisions that sort of may look familiar for us, especially if we know a little bit about that history. All right. Oh, Susan says, I definitely think this book can be read and enjoyed by young adult audiences, 15 and up. Great. As a teacher and library worker and parent, I know the stress of female friendships and peer pressure resonated with me, bringing back so many memories. And this is a timeless theme. I'm really glad to hear that. I hoped that we might all agree that it's okay for somebody to read. And I think my experience growing up was different books hit well at different times, and I was reading some books when I was younger that probably would have been considered maybe not as age appropriate, but my parents had a wonderful rule that I really loved, that was I could read anything so long as I understood it. And that kind of helped sort of regulate a little bit. And being a curious reader is always, I think, always a good thing. So Sharon asks, was the relationship between Lily and her mother slash sister going to be different at any point during the writing of the book? I knew that that was going to be the big twist in the book, from the moment that I pitched the book. So that was always going to be an element that came up. And I knew that I wasn't going to have Lily's sister slash mother, Joanna, I wasn't going to have her sweep in and suddenly be a wonderful mother who, suddenly is in Lily's life and being the person that Lily probably would have, in retrospect, if she'd known, the person she would have wanted to be raised by. I think Joanna, in my mind, is a woman who's gone through a trauma, a woman who was abused, and a woman who would not have necessarily had that language to describe what that abuse was during that era. And she would have sort of just tried to get on with her life as best she could, in my seeing of this character. And I think she's also a selfish woman. I think there are a lot of selfish women in this book, and women who make decisions for their own reasons. They make decisions because they're hurt and they're hurting. And so I knew that that was going to be a central element to the book. It's interesting. So my writing process is often, I'm really excited about a book at the beginning, and I tend to sit down and write chapter 1, scene 1, and then write through to the very end. I don't do a lot of skipping around, except if I'm doing a book that's split over a lot of different narratives, like The Last Garden in England. I'll write each narrative all the way through, and then I'll write the next one all the way through. But with this one, since it was a single point of view character and a single timeline, and so everything was lining up in a line, I wrote the beginning, and then the middle is always a bit of a, okay, we're going through the middle of this book, and I know I'm going to have to do edits, and there are things I need to fix, and I need to raise the stakes and add a grandmother. But when I got to Joanna and her scenes up in the Lake District, I knew that I'd hit on something that was staying true to the pitch that I had written, because those scenes flowed really, really fast. And the most editing that I had to do with it was make sure that it gelled with what everybody else was saying in the book. And if there were conflicting accounts between Joanna and her mother, that those conflicting accounts were due to the two of them disagreeing on what had happened, not everybody bungling their facts about what had happened. So I did a lot of checking back and forth between their different versions of stories, but a lot of people are lying about a lot of things through a lot of this book. So that was really the most intensive part of writing that. The rest of it flowed really well, and that's usually a pretty good sign. Let's see. I'm going through. You guys, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for all the comments and the questions. And I love seeing people responding back and forth to each other. It's really nice to see. Oh, Michelle said, love the theme and the power of friendships in this novel. I especially liked the fact that their friendships, the imperfects for Lily, was like a found family. Thank you. I really enjoyed writing those girls, and I really enjoyed bringing that friendship to life, and showing a little bit about sort of what these different women who are at the very beginning of their friendship might do to sort of support each other and all of that. Debbie says, what I loved was that both Lily and Catherine were on that edge, tightrope of change, with change being realistic. Thank you. I loved that they questioned and challenged their independence just enough to feel like change was in the air. Thank you. It's always this funny balance being a woman who is writing about a time that I did not live through. I think it's very tempting, and sometimes I do write characters that might feel a bit more modern than people might expect for that era, but I think the trick is trying to give a reason why somebody might feel that way, and give a reason why that character might be the way that she is. And so I'm glad to hear that. Kim asks, how long does it generally take you to write a book? This is a very interesting question. Um, I my mileage might vary. So I wrote this book in the pandemic, so that's thing one. I also wrote it during lockdown, so thing two, and I wrote it while I had a day job, which is thing three. So all of those are factors that um, went into play with this book. So I'd say it took me about 4 or 5 months of working on it straight through to write the first draft. And I find first drafts to be the most intensive part of the process. I'll be completely honest, I don't love writing them because I find them really emotionally exhausting, and mentally exhausting because you're creating something new every single time you sit down at your computer. The thing I really love is working through edits. So, one of the things I've learned about myself over the course of writing the books that I've written is that I really just try to get the story down for the first draft. And that story might have a lot of research and historical detail and all sorts of stuff with it, but what the second draft and the third draft, and until I get it into the shape that we're putting it into production, which means sending it for copy edits and proofreading and all of that. So what those drafts do, those additional drafts, they're really there for me to layer and to dig in and to make character motivation clearer, to add historical detail. Believe it or not, one of the notes that I got from my editor in that first developmental edit letter was that we needed more description, we needed more richness. She wanted to see what the rooms looked like, what the dresses looked like, what people looked like, how, what did going out smell like, what did it taste like when you had this, sticky orange gin drink that everybody drank. And so I think for me, a lot of that comes out in the second draft because it's like I've got the story down, and now I can work on really trying to bring it to life and filling these things out. Let's see. Gwen says, I felt Joanna had no love from her parents, who sought it from other men. Unfortunately, she was taken advantage of. And yeah, that was. I agree. Feels strange talking about characters like I didn't write them, but sometimes they just sort of they come out on the page differently than you think they will when you're initially planning the book, such as Lily's mother. Um, Sharon says Zoom calls are fantastic, but do you miss being in the US for book tours? I've never had a book tour. I moved to the UK before I started writing historical fiction, so I've actually never had a book tour. It's never worked out that I've been able to do that. I was once able to go and sign some stock in a Barnes and Noble in New York, the flagship at Union Square. But that is the extent of what I've been able to do. So stuff like this has been really wonderful for me. I miss the old days of getting to do signings. When I was writing romance, I did a little bit of that. I think I did one signing at one conference for The Light Over London just before that came out. And it was just, I just haven't had the opportunity, especially because I've had now two books come out during the pandemic. One book came out just before the pandemic, and I've got my lovely four books here. So, although I've written, I think The Last Dance of the Debutante is my 11th published book, and I've just handed in a 12th, and I'm working on a 13th because there's always something going on at different stages. Unfortunately, I just haven't had the opportunity to do that. So I'm really, really hopeful that pretty soon here I'm going to be able to do some of those things because I'd like to actually get to meet some of you guys in person. What a concept, right? Um, Denise says, your editing expands your novels by filling in details instead of having to cut material, something that a lot of authors seem to need to do. Is that right? Really depends on the book. So for the last Garden in England, my editor and I cut about 15,000 words from that book, and that's probably about 60 to 75 pages, depending on how you look at things and how much dialogue there is and how much white space on the page. Um, it's it really depends for me on the book what needs to get cut or what needs to get added in. So for The Last Dance of the Debutante, I probably turned that in at about 90,000 words, and it ended up being about 104,000 words. So I actually added in a whole bunch of stuff, which, if you think about it, adding the whole subplot with the grandmother, it would make sense that the book would expand out. So it really just depends on what the book needs, and how much is going on in the book. So um, lots of questions about lots of questions about my next book. So I can totally talk to you guys about that. So the next book like this, so historical fiction coming out, is I don't have a title and I don't have a date and I don't have a cover. So this is very, very early um, news. I have been calling it Return to Me, My Love, or the Liverpool book, because I don't know if Return to Me, My Love is actually going to be the title that my publisher goes with. There's a whole process where I, I basically send a book in with a title. Sometimes it's a working title, sometimes it's a title I'm hopeful will stick. And then it goes through the process of editorial approving it and sales and marketing approving it, and they sometimes, I think, might test it out with retailers and see how it goes. And sometimes the title just isn't working, and so they will adjust things. And I've absolutely loved everything I've ended up with, but the Light Over London, the title changed. I can't remember what it was initially. That's how big a change it was. The Whispers of War, the title changed, and again, I can't remember what the title was. The Last Garden in England, I think I was just calling the garden book. I initially wanted to call it The Winter Garden, but of course Kristen Hanna has The Winter Garden. It's a fantastic book, and so we wanted to kind of get away from that. And then The Last Dance of the Debutante was, up until very late in the game, was called The Last Debutante. And Georgie Balak came out with a book called The Last Debutante, and she was going to publish before me. So we didn't want there to be a conflict between those two books. So The Last Dance of the Debutante was a bit of a collaborative effort with my editor, my marketing team, my family pitching in, although they mostly gave me pun titles that weren't very helpful. But I'm sure they were useful somewhere in there. And so yeah, that's sort of how that ended up being. So Return to Me, My Love may or may not end up being the title of the book, but it is about a young woman in Liverpool who is Catholic, and the book opens with her wedding day. She is being married at the registry office in Liverpool to a young man who's Jewish, and her family is not happy about that. And she gets married, and then they are, for various reasons, he is basically paid by her family to go away. And so he goes off to New York to pursue his dream of being a jazz musician, and she's left pregnant on her wedding day. And so the book then goes into the war, where she's had their daughter, who he's never met, and she has this whole life in Liverpool. The war, of course, comes and throws everything into chaos. She has to send their daughter away to be evacuated, and she has to figure out what her life looks like now that she's not caring for her daughter in the middle of this war. And then something happens that changes her life, and in 1961 then brings the two of them, the man and the woman, back together again. And it all centers around their daughter. So I'm going to get better and better at describing that the more and more people ask me this question, but I'm still about a year away from that book coming out. So check back in and see what my summary is after that. The other book, the one that I'm writing right now, is the first in a brand new mystery series that I'm writing. It's a historical mystery series, and right now, again, we don't have a title for the first book, but the main character at the moment is named Evelyn Redford. And Evelyn Redfern is a young woman who is recruited to work in Churchill's war rooms. His cabinet office moved underground, literally under Whitehall, and a murder happens amongst one of the girls in the typing pool. And Evelyn is not impressed with the military police sent in to investigate, so she decides to take matters into her own hands and investigate the murder and figure out what is happening with her, all of the different things that are going on in the cabinet war rooms. So hopefully hopefully, that will be coming out sometime next year in 2023. That is very, very, very early in the process. Like I literally only hit 25,000 words out of what's supposed to be a 90,000 word book yesterday. So you're getting this very live and very much as it's happening. But if you're interested in those, if you go to my website, there is a button up at the top right corner called that says sign up for Julia's newsletter, I think it is. If you go ahead and put your details in there, I keep everybody informed about things as things become a bit more solid and a bit more information comes out. So for instance, when a cover comes out, when a pre-order link comes out, when I can actually talk about a title. And so that is what you'll be able to hopefully check out more of, which will be kind of cool. Um, let's see, let's see. I'm going to see if there's some more questions here. Again, you guys have been absolutely fantastic. I think we've got over 200 comments already, which is amazing. Um, Sharon says you live in the perfect place for your research. I do. It's great. I was up in Liverpool last week doing some research for the Liverpool book for Return to Me, My Love. And it was really, really fun. Um, really fun. It was me getting to, be my most nerdy history geek and muck around in archives and take a look at all sorts of things that you can only get up there because that's where the city council keeps its records. So a lot of important historical documents for Liverpool are held there, including a lot of stuff around the Beatles. But I was not looking at the Beatles. I think the researchers were a bit like, oh, somebody who wants to do something else other than, other than the Beatles or Liverpool Football Club. So that was pretty exciting. Do do do. Um, Oh, Aspasia says the Liverpool book would make a great film, as would the Debutantes. Thank you. I think secretly a lot of authors hope that their book gets turned into a movie or a show or whatever it is. Hasn't happened for me yet, but you never know. Maybe I can keep my fingers crossed and it will happen. Um, let's see. Kellyanne says, love the sound of Return to Me. I, for one, will never tire of World War II books. That's really, really interesting. And you've actually hit on something that I was talking to my agent about last Friday, which was, for the last few years, every time we come up to a new contract, we've been asking ourselves, do we think that publishing is moving away from World War II books? And the answer keeps being no over and over again. I think people really love the subject. There's so much to write about within World War II. There's so many different places to write about. And it just feels like, it just keeps growing and growing. And I have to say, there are just so many different stories to be told and so many different things coming out of that world. So, of that time period. So I don't see it slowing down either. We'll see. Karen asked, how do you decide character names? I hate naming characters. I really do. I'm not good at it. I find that if I don't have a name for a character, I have a really, really hard time moving forward with writing. So I sit there and I sit there and I sit there, and it's almost like when somebody asks you what's your favorite movie or what's your favorite book, and you don't have an immediate answer because your whole brain goes blank, and you just think, I don't know. So for me, whenever I have to name a character, it's always a look to my um, bookshelf and pull somebody's name off the bookshelf. So you guys might see some common, some familiar names in books from time to time, especially if you're a historical fiction fan. I also have started adding little Easter eggs to different books, and I can't always remember what they are until one of my friends or family members messages me and says, I just saw that in the book. But one thing I can tell you is, and I'm hoping this makes it all the way through to publication, my one of my favorite movies, my favorite movie, is Otto Preminger's movie Laura, with Gene Tierney and Dana Andrews, and it's a great classic noir. If you haven't seen it, it's really a fantastic film, and it has a twist to end all twists. It's really fabulous. If you've seen the movie and you know the twist, don't mention it because it's really worth preserving it for people who haven't seen it before. I love that film, and so I needed a name, a set of names, just a really quick thing that somebody says in while they're flying a mission. They're an RAF. They're a member of the RAF, and so I needed a name for a flight crew, and I needed three last names, and so I made them three last names from that movie. And the only people who are going to get that are my partner and maybe a couple family members and you guys, now that I've told you, if you know the film. But it's just kind of one of those fun things that I just threw in there because I needed names. I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of writing the Liverpool book while sitting in my partner's flat next to a movie poster for It's a Wonderful Life. So a lot of the surnames, a lot of the last names for characters in that book also come from the It's a Wonderful Life poster. So there you go. Kim's asking, is there a way we can get book plates for all of your books? Yes, absolutely. So on my Facebook page, I've added a couple of times, and I'll keep doing this, an entry form for book plates. I just sent out, I think, 50 envelopes yesterday to people with both book plates and bookmarks. And actually, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I can show you guys what you're getting because they're sitting right next to me here. So this is what the book plates look like. And there's an option on there to request up to four of them. So I've got four books out, so four book plates. They are Last Dance the Debutante branded, but and I'll sign and personalize those. And then the bookmarks, which everybody who asked for a book plate is getting bookmarks as well. So these are the Last Dance the Debutante bookmarks, and they've got the other books on the back of them too. So I will also try to drop that into the comments here. And then also, if you want to go ahead and email me directly, Julia Kelly at juliakellywrites.com, I can send you the entry form. And basically what that form does is it lets me print off address labels to you and make sure that I get your book plates to you. So if you guys have already requested them in the form, they're on their way. I'm having to do them in batches because there have been quite a few of them, but that's really exciting. So there you go. Let's see. Oh, Sharon asked, can you talk more about how you picked which music was talked about in the book? Yes. So I love the idea of adding music and references to music, song titles, to a book. Because I think it really helps give a sense and a flavor for the era. And I know one of the things that my sister mentioned when she was talking to me about this book was, you know, sometimes we have moments of thinking, debutantes are very old-fashioned and very Victorian or Georgian or whatever. And so it was really interesting to her. She said, every once in a while somebody would mention the fact that, they had watched something on the television or that Little Richard is playing in the background. So, and it reminded her that these are actually it's much more modern than that, and it's much more recognizable than that to a lot of us, because I grew up listening to a lot of what I guess was considered oldies, although I'm now terrified to think of what's considered oldies now. Probably all the stuff I grew up with. And so I picked songs that I knew were on the charts in the UK in 1957 or 1958 so that I could make sure that the songs had actually made it over from the US, especially if they were United States based artists. So Elvis, Little Richard, and then I think I have Paul Anka's song Diana in there as well. And then some of the names of the band leaders are actually real band leaders who did do debutante balls and things like that. So it's just a really fun way to, again, add a little tiny bits of research in there. Susan says, since today, I think this is about the World War II books, since today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, it's important to keep this thread going. So many untold stories wanting to be shared. It's a subject very close to my heart since my in-laws were survivors. I hope those books keep coming. Absolutely. And I really think they will. I think there are, again, as you say, so many stories to be told, and so many things. In fact, I don't know if I can sneak over and get this. You guys are getting me moving around, so this is always dangerous. My setup is pretty precarious here. So she wasn't, as far as I know, she was a member of the French Resistance. So this is Miss Dior. This is a nonfiction book I just picked up today, and I had no idea that she was a member of the French Resistance. This is Christian Dior's sister, who Miss Dior, the perfume, was named for, and she actually ended up being captured and sent to a concentration camp. And it is a story I knew nothing about, and so I, just being interested in history, figured I would go ahead and pick it up. And it turns out that somebody has written a novel about her spy network as well. So those stories are being told and are surfacing, but then of course there's just so much more to learn, and so much more. I think especially if you're a historical fiction reader, you learn so much as you read, and there are so many really interesting things to sort of dive down rabbit holes with, and it's just absolutely fantastic. We have a vote for Adam Driver being the hero in the Liverpool book. He's quite a bit hunkier than the guy I was thinking of, but maybe might have to do a bit of a bit of rewriting there. Um, let's see what else. I'm sorry if the feed is acting up, guys. Again, I'm on Facebook's own software, and sometimes that's a little up and down. So I'm really glad to hear really glad to hear that book plates and bookmarks are exciting. Um, let's see what else. Denise said the music references did help me to remember that the book is more of a contemporary historic fiction, since so much of my reading delves farther back in time. Absolutely, I think that's one of the things that really helped me while I was writing it too, was remembering that this is right on the brink of a time period that my aunts all remember really well. So, um, and Kellyanne says, I suppose 1958 was just before the quote British invasion. Yep. When the best music was coming from that side of the pond and not the other way around. That's absolutely right. So obviously you get the Beatles, but before the Beatles, there were a lot of other bands as well that were starting to bubble up. So this is just before that time period. I had a question about about what I'm reading right now, so I thought I'd really quickly answer that question, and then I'll fill you guys in on some more housekeeping. This is going a little bit longer than I expected, but surprise, surprise, I like chatting with you guys. So right now, I am reading a book called I think it's called the Twyford Code by Janice Hallett. I also have on deck, because I have a few new things coming up, Renee Ryan's brand new book, which I believe is called The Salzburg Code. No coincidence there, it just happened that way, that those two books are right up there on my TBR. And Caroline Bishop has a book that's coming out this year called The Lost Chapter, so that's another one to look for. I haven't read it yet, but it does actually have a little bit of a connection, from what I understand, to The Last Dance of the Debutante, in that some of her inspiration came from that same Fiona McCarthy book, I think. So I will read it, I will report back, and I will let you guys know what I think. But I think it would be a really fun thing to sort of keep tabs on what everybody's reading. So if you guys want to drop into comments what it is that you're reading as well, I'm sure there's always a love of reading recommendations. I wanted to go ahead and remind you to keep checking back for more discussion in the comments. Again, go ahead and go wild, respond to each other, chat amongst yourselves. I'll also dive in there and be responding back to some things, because you guys are great, and there's way more in there than I can ever talk about in an hour. I thought also, as a thank you for helping me launch something new, a new little experiment. First of all, I'm going to have a post tomorrow